Okay, good evening, and thank you for those attending in person, those attending online, for coming along to Charlie Underwood's inaugural professorial lecture. Well overdue, I think. So I'm Rick Cooper, I'm the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Science, and we'll just introduce Charlie for 1 or 2 minutes. I guess I've known Charlie for quite a number of years now, but I don't think for as long as many people in the audience. And many of you will know Charlie's career better than I, but to just sort of try to summarize, Charlie did his BSc in geology at the University of Exeter back in 1989, and then his PhD in Bristol in 1993. Sorry?
That's painfully long time ago.
It's not quite as long ago as mine, but anyway, the PhD in Bristol on the taxonomy of graptolites. And obviously, when I read that, I had to go and look up what was taxonomy and what were graptolites. But Charlie will explain further, and I think probably most of the audience is also not so unaware as I. Anyway, Charlie joined Birkbeck at the turn of the century, I decided to say, in 2000, having previously had appointments at the University of Liverpool and in industry, and was head of department, I mean, we called it assistant dean in the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences for 5 years prior to the restructuring of Birkbeck back in 2023, I think. And has well over, I think, 100 peer-reviewed publications with very many extensive international far-reaching collaborations. Spanning the topics, obviously, that sort of stem from the fossil record and shark's teeth and so on. Anyway, let me hand over to Charlie to talk much more coherently about shark's teeth and related topics as soon as he gets his microphone connected. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Charlie.
Let me just put this here. Okay, hopefully that microphone is working. Thank you very much, Rick. Have we still got that thing on there? Yes, let me remove that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is not so much give a beautifully crafted, coherent talk on one fine point of research, but really just a little cruise through some of the sort of points that I consider most interesting and important about sharks, living and fossil, and looking at a number of topics. So there may be a slight feel to this of like sort of daytime television type links where you go between sort of slightly unrelated topics with rather dubious linking phrases between them. But I'm going to try and make this at least so there's sort of a coherent theme running through it. Okay, so the title of this, Tonguestones, Jaws and the Meg, is really just referring back to, I suppose, sharks, and particularly fossil sharks, in popular culture. And that's sort of a theme I'm going to be following through, or at least dabbling in at various points in time. Okay, so let's take you right back to the start of why I think, and people may disagree, why I think fossil sharks are important. Well, hang on, is that moving onwards, or do I need to turn this on? Hang on. That's interesting. So, okay, I'll do it this way then. Can I? Not progressing, which is.
That's the bottom left. Yeah, there's an arrow.
Oh yeah, I'll do it that way. Okay, so you're in 17th century Italy. You're living a very fine life, as many people did at the time, but not everyone. And your probably greatest worry, apart from whether your source of wine would dry up, was the fact you might be poisoned by someone trying to take your position. And that was very good if you happen to live in certain places in southern Europe, particularly in Malta, because the people from Malta realised that they had an amazing cure-all for poisoning, drunkenness, and in fact pretty much every other nastiness that someone could play on you, and made quite a lot of money out of it. And that was, they had tonguestones. Tonguestones are clearly these semi-magical objects that appear within the rocks. They are vaguely tongue-shaped, triangular, shiny, very tactile. And as the century wore on, and as people got more and more paranoid, tungstones' value increased dramatically until they started to become really very sought-after items, and some people exporting these, particularly from Malta, were starting to become really quite rich. But this was also at a time when people were starting to look at these magical or supernatural entities in the natural world and think what these actually were. And as you can see, here's a beautiful little display of tungstones. That's clearly someone who's really never going to get poisoned. And that's an individual one without a pretty gold mount on it. And it had already been noted in the sort of early 1600s that these bore some resemblance to teeth of sharks, but no one had really followed it up. And it was only really when this person, Nicholas Steno, who's Danish, moved to southern Europe, but started to look at things slightly more critically. And in 1666, he managed to obtain the head of a very large shark that had been caught off the Italian coast. He dissected this famously and realised that these tungstones, as had sort of been noted previously, were not only a little bit similar to the teeth of sharks, they were effectively the same thing. And of course that had major ramifications. That meant that remains of animals were somehow ending up in rocks. And from that, he started to formulate ideas that essentially became the basis of the science of geology. He started to work out that remains of animals can get buried, and through that, he formulated the law of superposition. That is, rocks that lie on top of other rocks are younger. So younger rocks get laid down on top of older ones. And so, at least partly through fossil sharks and through the paranoia of Italian nobles, the science of geology was born. I just want to note that this idea that possessing fossil shark's teeth prevents drunkenness doesn't work. It's been rigorously tested by myself and some colleagues in the room, one particular who I'm looking at. Okay, so we now have established the fact that shark's teeth can end up in the rock record. That's fine. So what are shark's teeth? How do they fit within sharks and within life in general? Well, here's a CT scan that we did at the Natural History Museum of a section of jaw of a modern poor beetle shark. And as we go through, let's take that back because I quite like doing that. As we go through this section of jaw, you can see on the edge of the jaw we have the biting teeth. But if we look at the inside of the jaw, we have teeth that are developing and moving up onto the jaw to the jaw edge where they're actually coming into use. So we actually have a production line of teeth. And as the teeth cease being used, as they get blunt, as they break, they fall out and are shed. This means that during a lifetime, sharks can produce many thousands of teeth, and that's many thousands of potential fossils. So compared to any other fossil vertebrates of that sort of size, sharks yield far more potential fossils than, for example, a similar sized whale or dolphin, will produce maybe a couple of hundred bones and teeth. A shark of the same size could produce tens of thousands of teeth. So many times more likely to end up in the fossil record, and potentially with more fossils, there's more you can do with them. In addition to that, we do have occasional remains of entire sharks, but these are very rare. And the main reason being is that unlike us, we have a skeleton that's made of bone, hard, mineralized material. Sharks have a skeleton that's made of cartilage, which is hardened with minerals to make it more robust, but it does very severely limit how easily it fossilizes. So we do occasionally get beautiful whole fossil sharks like that, and you can see the skin outline, you can see the head up at that end with some little teeth in it, and in fact you can actually see a fish skull in its gut. In fact, it looks like it was so greedy that may have contributed to its demise. But most of the time, this is what we get: teeth and lots of them. This is a photo taken in a warehouse in Morocco, where you can literally buy shark's teeth by the kilo. Because sharks shed their teeth very rapidly and very continuously, it also means their teeth are pretty disposable. So there's no need to make them so they last for a very long time, because they're continually replaced. For that reason, sharks' teeth can reflect the diet and the feeding much more so than, for example, the teeth of mammals like us. We only have 2 sets of teeth to last our entire life, of which one set is only when we're a toddler. So we essentially have 1 set of teeth to last us our life. If we break that tooth, well, that's gone. It's never going to be replaced. If a shark breaks a tooth, doesn't matter, here comes another one. And so we can see here just this small selection of some of the variety of teeth that sharks and rays, which are essentially just flattened sharks, have. So you have these slender, gripping teeth here of a mako shark, a pursuit predator that grabs hold of slippery fish and squid. We have these knife-like bladed teeth that lock together to form like a saw blade of a kite-fin shark. That's a deep water form that sometimes eats fish and squid bigger than itself. It is also quite happy to gorge on dead whales that drop onto the ocean floor. We've got these rounded, knobbly, ridged teeth of, in this case, a guitarfish that it can use to crush crabs. And finally, we have these flat, almost paving slab-like teeth of a bat ray that can crush even the toughest of shells and clams and snails. So the teeth can do a whole range of functions, and because of this, it means that fossil sharks' teeth are really a very good indicator of what the shark did while it was alive, what it fed on, and so on. I also mentioned in passing that sharks differ from us. They differ from most vertebrates in that they don't have a true skeleton. They don't have a skeleton of bone. And if we look right back in their ancestry, we can see that they've split off a very long time ago. So there's also fossil groups here which you can largely ignore. So down there, we've got lamprey and hagfish are jawless, gloopy, elongate fish, the only jawless vertebrates we have alive today. And we have some heavily armoured fossil forms, some without jaws, some once jaws have evolved. And at that point we have a split. A group which has no true bones, with right at the end there we have just 2 surviving branches, the sharks and rays and the chimaeras. And I'll introduce you to the weird and wonderful world of chimaeras later. And on the other branch, the ones we're more familiar with. Normal fish, lungfish and coelacanths, and tetrapods, vertebrates with legs, including us. So essentially the sharks and their relatives are the other branch of vertebrates, with a 400 million year split from all other vertebrates around today. So they have this great potential for looking right back into the ancestry of our group to see what is common between them and us and what is different. In a very cartoonish way, that shark sort of grouping we can divide up into a number of different groups. And one thing you can see quite dramatically is how these have been affected by the really big extinction event that occurred at the end of the Permian period. This wiped out probably 95% of life on the planet. The extinction event at the end of the Cretaceous that took out most of the dinosaurs, excluding the ones that were the birds, is a pretty minor blip in comparison. So basically, before this Permian extinction, we have lots of weird and wonderful forms split between the chimera-like things and the shark-like things, but none of them that similar to things alive today. After that point, we essentially have three groups. The hybridont sharks that gradually dwindle and disappear by the end of the Cretaceous. The chimeras just about keep going. The fact most of you have probably never heard of one or seen one is because there's not that much of them. And the modern type sharks and rays that greatly expand through the Jurassic, the Cretaceous, get through the end Cretaceous extinction with a few losses, but then after that, they quickly shrug that off and re-radiate. And I'm going to be looking particularly at a few of these points, largely in the Jurassic here and after the end Cretaceous extinction. Fossil sharks' teeth are abundant in many rocks, but they're not necessarily always conspicuous. So, for example, here's a nice rock, some Cretaceous rock from Morocco, and you can see it's largely made of little bits of bone and teeth. You can see some shark's teeth quite conspicuously in it. But many sharks and rays are actually relatively small, and many of them have teeth that are minute. Probably half of sharks and rays alive today have teeth that are only a millimetre long. And that's much the case in the fossil record. So rather than just seeing these nice shiny pointy things in the field, often we have to use other methods. We have to sieve sediments, either like putting it through a sieve while drying and be covered in dust, sieving mud using water, or by putting rock in weak acid to dissolve away the rock and leave the teeth behind. And it's by looking for these very small teeth that we often get a much better idea of the diversities of sharks through geological time. And just a little example of that, here's a roofing tile. It's actually in the Natural History Museum now, from Oxfordshire, rocks of Middle Jurassic age, with a nice shark's teeth in the middle of this roof tile. These are rocks that were the first rocks in the world to be systematically collected for fossils. The first described dinosaur, a Megalosaurus, comes from these rocks, these Middle Jurassic of Oxfordshire. And a few shark's teeth were known. But until well into the late 20th century, no one had actually bothered taking any of this, putting it in acid, or putting the muddy bits through a sieve and seeing what small teeth you've got. And indeed, these larger teeth are outnumbered tens, even hundreds to one by minute teeth. These are less than a millimetre, which certainly sort of opens up our view of what the Middle Jurassic was like. It wasn't a time with just a few medium-sized sharks swimming around. It was a time when modern sharks exploded in diversity. Many of the modern groups appeared within a very short time period, but because we're looking at larger things, we've ignored them until very recently. So in this imaginary Middle Jurassic lagoon in Oxfordshire, we've got a Megalosaurus wading through the water, hunting for whatever has been left by the tide. But under its feet, we have small sharks, and rays of a whole range of different types that have been ignored for 150 years just because no one had looked. And that in mind really opens up the way we can start looking at fossil sharks. Now that's just a sort of single example, but using this method where we start to look for smaller things means that we can start looking at ancient environments on a much bigger scale. And we can start looking at diversity, at ecology, at all sorts of things that you wouldn't otherwise really be able to judge unless you start to look for small and large teeth together. And one place that proved particularly good for this is in Egypt. There's some large piles of rocks someone's left behind. Even there are plenty of fossils. The surface that the pyramids are built on, these are just a couple of photos. These are 2p piece-sized discs, are things called nummulites, and these are actually among the largest single-celled organisms that have ever lived. And they're present in such huge quantities that actually the rock layer that the pyramids sit on is made probably 90% of these. So they're present in their billions. But there are other things there as well. There's a snail, a gastropod, another little nummulite, and various tubular fossils too. So clearly this area is extremely rich in fossils. But in this case, these are shallow water limestones, and the sharks aren't particularly conspicuous. But if you go further to the west, you get rocks that are rather more suitable for seeing and finding fossils. So we started off in Cairo, or just immediately to the west of Cairo, with the pyramids on the Giza Plateau. When you travel to this, if you look at any map of Egypt, you see this weird green blob out to the side. It doesn't sort of seem to fit into the desert. That's the Fayum Oasis, and along the northern edge of it is a large lake. A lake that has had so much water extracted from it that it's gone from being a freshwater lake in Roman times. Water levels dropped 40 meters. The salt has become so salty, all the fish died, and it's been stocked with fish from the Mediterranean because it's now as salty as the sea. But in this area around the Fayum, north and to the west of the lake and the oasis, are rocks that are amazingly exposed and are absolutely full of fossils. So again, here's the same. Here's the Fayum Oasis. There's the lake, Birkbeck, Karun. And along here, you've got big escarpments, rocks, sandstones, mudstones, limestones, all around here. Some of the younger rocks here contain lots of land mammals, including the oldest known very diverse fossils of monkeys, which is what they're very famous for. But particularly as you get out towards the west, these rocks are slightly older, they're marine, and they contain fossils of particularly large early whales. And so this area recently has been designated a World Heritage Site, Wadi al-Hitan, roughly translating to Valley of the Whales or Valley of the Large Fish. And when you go there, it's really quite a beautiful place, but also geologically very diverse. So if we look here at the western end of the valley, you've got these beautiful wind-sculpted sandstone blocks sticking up, a sort of almost alien, unworldly landscape, but composed of this sandstone laid down in a very shallow tropical sea. Go just a few kilometres to the northeast of that, and the rocks change from being these shallow water sandstones to rather deeper water mudstones with a few sandy levels between them. So we actually pass from being very shallow water to moderately deep water. You can actually, in places, see the ancient seafloor sloping down as you go from maybe 10 metres of water there to about 40 or 50. This means that you can look at the animals in these two very different environments, but within the same geographic area. As I said, this is particularly famous for its whales. Here's just a few of them. That's a skeleton of a small 3-metre-long whale called Durodon that's just been excavated and laid out on a rock for you to look at. Here are a couple of skeletons of a much larger whale, a thing called Basilosaurus, 15, 17 metres long. Again, left for people to come and see in situ. Just a slight aside, although these are whales, they're not whales that you recognise as such. They are fully marine. They certainly couldn't move on land, but they still have little back legs. They have skull that probably more resembles that of a gigantic wolf than that of a modern whale. And they have great big canine teeth at the front of the mouth, and at the side of the mouth, great big slicing molar type teeth. So these are whales that have only recently evolved to become fully marine. And in fact, in slightly older rocks in this area, you can get whales that are really just like, I suppose, if you scale an otter up to be 4 metres long and put a great big wolf's head on one end of it, that's pretty much what these whales would have looked like. So we've got lots of large whales in there, but we have lots of other things too. There's crocodiles, there's turtles, there's lots and lots of sea cows, and obviously lots of sharks. It's just sort of a few, so we get some nice big ones that we can pick up. So that's a tooth of a type of a todus, a big mega predator, big serrated teeth. That's maybe half again the size of the largest great white shark tooth today. So a big chunky thing. Here we've got a rostrum of a large sawfish, which is a type of highly modified ray with this great big sort of snout that sticks out in front of it. That's over 2 metres long. But we've got lots of small stuff. Here's just a little bit of desert surface with lots of small shark and fish teeth. And if you collect a bit of that, put it through a sieve, and got a handful of it, and you can see these little shark's teeth coming out in huge numbers. So we've got an awful lot of fossils there. But there's bigger stuff too. So here's a couple of whale excavations. These are both these big whale, this Basilosaurus. So here's one of these shallow water sands. And we, or David Ward from the audience, managed to obtain a lot of the sediment from around those bones. And the bones were shipped back to the United States to be cleaned of sediment. David prevented all the sediment being thrown in the bin, sieved it, and got many hundreds of shark's teeth out. That's in these shallow water sands. In the deep water muds, here's another Basilosaurus skeleton being excavated. And again, we managed to get some of the sediment from around this. So we've essentially got a chance here to look at 4 different assemblages. The shallow water sharks, medium deep, moderately deep water sharks, sharks around a whale skeleton in shallow water, and sharks around a whale skeleton in deep water. So what do we find? Are there any differences? Well, our shallow water assemblage is pretty much identical in many respects, despite this is 35 million years old, to what you get if you went off the north coast of Australia today, or off the Bahamas, or off the Philippines. So we're dominated by small to medium whaler sharks, things of maybe 1.5 to 2 metres long. There's a small weasel shark there, which is extremely abundant. We know weasel sharks today feed almost exclusively on small octopus. And we've got signs that these shallow water sands had huge seagrass meadows. So you can imagine shoals of these hunting small octopus and cuttlefish in amongst these seagrasses. We've got various rays, we've got stingray, and we've got guitarfish that are today common in tropical shallow water. We've got a tooth of a shell crushing ray, and we've got some spines there from the rostrum of big sawfish. So this is pretty much the same as you'd find today in a shallow tropical environment. If we go into the deep water, we've got some very rare teeth in these mega predators. We've also got teeth of open water hunters. That's an early relative of a mako, but slightly larger than modern mako. We've got another octopus specialist, and we've got some deeper water sort of generalist feeders. This is an extinct thing called Abdunia, which is extremely common. And we've got some other sharks that largely we find in deep water. So a little cat shark, a little saw shark, a hound shark, and a plankton-feeding ray, a relative of the modern mantas. So things there that, like deeper water, all live out near the sea surface. If we look at our shallow water whale, what we might expect to find are teeth of loads and loads of scavengers, but we don't. In fact, we get no scavengers in there. So this is pretty much the same as we're getting in the shallow water sands elsewhere. A few things in slightly different proportions. The sand tiger shark. There's a fresher shark, an animal that lives at water surface, but comes into much shallower water than a mako does. But we've got a couple of other things that were a bit surprising. We've got a couple of ambush feeding rays. We've got a butterfly ray, we've got an electric ray. Both of these things hide on the seafloor, just something edible comes close, and then they just suck them in using little tiny grasping teeth to hold on to them. These tend to live in places where they can hide. And we've also got, there's our Abdunia again, our deep water forms. So we're getting some sharks otherwise only found in deep water in the shallow water around the whale. So they're not coming here around this whale to scavenge it. What's more likely is this whale was covered in seaweed and covered in sponges and was basically a little oasis sitting on this barren, sandy seafloor. And that was allowing deeper water sharks and things that are ambush predators to hide in amongst all this debris that's attached to these whale bones and use it to ambush their prey. If we're looking into the deep water example, again, no big scavengers. We've got a single broken tip of the tooth of the big Atodus. We've got quite a few teeth of a very small tiger shark. Tiger sharks like scavenging, so that may well be a scavenger. We've got a nurse shark, so it specialises in crabs, maybe hunting crabs around here. And we also had evidence that this wasn't buried quickly. These bones were lying around on the seafloor for quite a considerable period of time, because we have things like this. This is a fragment of whale bone, and you've got these weird little burrows, little borings in it, these little holes. They are made by a bizarre and rather unpleasant-looking creature called Osedax, better known as a snotworm, which bores into bone and eats the collagen in it. And these only occur where whale bones are sitting on the seafloor for a very long period of time. So we can use these fossil sharks as a way of really looking at ancient environments and ecosystems within them, because we get more of them. Now, we're almost certainly getting the same pattern with other types of fish too, but because they're not shedding these huge numbers of teeth, we're just not seeing as much evidence. But that brings us back to how these teeth form and the importance of them right in study of evolution of modern vertebrates, as we mentioned right at the beginning. And here's again nice CT scan. This is a head of a modern paw beetle shark. So if we remove the flesh from it, flesh and skin, you can see the skull starting to appear. Now the skull isn't made of skull bones like ours. It's made of a brain case of cartilage with the jaw bones that sort of hang down underneath it. So the jaws aren't strongly attached to the skull, which is why sharks' jaws can sort of slide backwards and forwards as they feed. But again, you can see the teeth here are extremely prominent. Now, are these teeth the same as the teeth we're seeing in other vertebrates? We've seen that these split 400 million years ago. And in fact, the first signs we have of sharks in the fossil record aren't teeth, but are what look like little shark scales. Again, something I'll come to in a minute. But we have, so just sort of as a reminder of how sharks' teeth work, this is a still from that little animation I showed you earlier. Sharks' teeth start to form along the inside of the jaw, move up in a conveyor belt right to the top, and then drop out. In a few cases, they don't drop out, and they just end up being sort of drawn back into the jaw. And this is an example. This is a bizarre shark-like form, called helicoprion, where that's the developing teeth move up the back of the jaw, form this big serrated blade projecting forwards from the jaw itself, and then that serrated blade essentially gets sucked back inside the jaw without actually being lost. Why these teeth are fused together and aren't lost is again something we'll look at in a minute. With these teeth being rather different to the teeth of ours, now our teeth and the teeth of all other vertebrates other than sharks don't form on the inside of the jaw and move up on a conveyor belt. They form within the jaw, grow upwards, and if they're replaced, they push other teeth out as they push their way up. Completely different. So have teeth evolved independently, or is it just a different mechanism of the way the tooth development has evolved? And also, what have these got to do with it? This is shark skin. That's skin of a tiger shark. That's a much magnified skin of a great white. And these are covered in these weird little tooth-like scales called denticles. Denticles meaning small teeth. So are the teeth in the jaws of a shark and the denticles on the outside essentially the same thing? Or are they something fundamentally different? Well, one way of looking at it is by looking at how these form within the embryos. So this is an embryo of the spotted dogfish or spotted cat shark, depending on whether you do fishing in this country or whether you're being technical. And in this CT scan, it's basically just showing hard tissue. So in this embryo, we can see all the little denticles forming in red dots and a few teeth forming around the edge of the mouth too. So both of these form very early on in the development of the embryo, long before it hatches. If we look at these in detail, look at the edges of the jaw, you can actually see that there's a fundamental difference between these denticles on the outside and these teeth on the inside. So if we look at the outside, the denticles, which are sort of leaf-shaped here, are forming in a fairly irregular way. They're just popping up wherever there's space. If we look on the edge of the jaw, there's these denticles on the outside, there's a gap, and here's the first teeth forming in the embryo, and these are very regularly spaced. So here we've got a row of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teeth, and then offset from them we've got a second row, 1, 2, 3, 5 teeth, but alternating with it. So unlike the denticles, the teeth are forming in a regular, ordered way and are forming from the inside out, whereas the denticles are just forming where they are. So there's clearly something fundamentally different there. So this idea that teeth are really just modified denticles really doesn't seem so likely if we start to look at the embryos. And then as teeth develop, depending on the types of sharks you're dealing with, they may just add on more, or they might just get larger. So here's, at the top is a CT scan of the jaw of an embryo of an electric ray. And here, each row of teeth that forms has added on one more tooth as they get wider and wider. So your first row's got 2, second row's got 3, third row's got 4, 5, 6. And here's an adult of the same species, and again you can see these beautifully alternating teeth form this extremely regular pattern, unlike the denticles that are completely irregular. So that's the difference between teeth and scales are clearly different in normal sharks and rays. But then we have this thing, which basically throws a bit of a spanner in the works. This is our back to our chimaeras, a weird creature indeed, something you'll probably never come across. They are actually extremely common around Britain, but you rarely see they rarely come into water less than 500 metres deep. And if you put a trawl net down at 1500 metres, these are the commonest large thing down there. But they're a bit bizarre. And what makes it even more bizarre is their teeth. So here's a CT scan of the jaw of one. So we're gradually removing the soft tissue, and what you can see emerging is the teeth, but it's these large plates. 2 plates on the lower jaw, 4 plates on the upper jaw. And if we look at these plates in more detail, they actually have these hardened structures within them, these weird rods, almost like little strings of beads going through the middle of these. Now, sharks have nothing like this. So how on earth can these have evolved, and what is actually happening? So what's the relationship between these and our sharks? Well, firstly, sharks have, let's say, these multiple teeth forming conveyor belts, whereas the chimeras have these single plates. Luckily, if we go in the fossil record, we can find things that are halfway between the two. And so here we have some teeth and some slices through them of a couple of an early chimera relative, a thing called Hilodus. So you can see here we've got 3 separate teeth, clearly separate, but when we look at the roots of them, they're slightly fused together. And then here we've got another tooth of much the same thing, where not only the roots are fused, but the top of the tooth is fused as well. So what we're seeing in chimeras is these big tooth plates are essentially where a whole row of teeth are fused together to form this continuously growing sheet. And here's we've got some examples of that. Here's some of these teeth growing, which are partially fused together. And then we get the example here where they're now fully fused, but these teeth are growing just as a big sort of spiraling sheet. To look at these weird structures within it, we've looked at a couple of different chimeras, but particularly at this thing. This is spookfish Hariota, with this weird sort of big nose. So again, here's the mouth, here's these tooth plates sticking out. And if we look at these tooth plates in a bit more detail, here we're looking onto a biting surface, you can see there are hard bits that stick out. If we, with a CT scan, if we make it so that we're looking at less dense material, this is all that's left. So most of our tooth plate has disappeared, leaving behind these weird porous and structures and strings of beads. And if we slice it, again we see the same thing, these much denser structures embedded in these tooth plates. And there's nothing like these in any other vertebrates. So we decided to look at them in a bit more detail to see, are these actually made of bone or bone-like material at all, or are they something utterly different? So on the top here is just a slice through. You can see some of these sort of white, in paler colours, some of these bead-like structures. We've looked at the various elements in them. Now, bone is calcium phosphate, so we expect lots of phosphorus and lots of calcium. And where we cross it in the whole tooth plate, we're getting lots of calcium, lots of phosphorus. That's fine. as we'd expect with any bone-like material. But where we're crossing these beads, we also get large peaks of magnesium. That's not present in large quantities in any other bone-like material. We now know this is a material called magnesium whitlockite. It's present in bone as a very minor component, but within these biting surfaces of chimeras is, as far as we're aware, the only place in all of animals where this biomineral occurs exclusively. So we've actually got this almost unique biomineral in a group that haven't got enamel, they haven't got this hard, brittle tooth surface like we have, so they've had to evolve something different to do the same function. So we have essentially this unique biomaterial, which yet again goes to show just how weird these chimeras are. Going back to identicals, teeth, clearly these are separate, but what about things where we've got teeth that appear to be on the outside? And we get these in three groups. We've got sawfish, which have rostrum with like little teeth along the edge of it. Saw sharks, unrelated, again, rostrum with teeth along the edge. And an extinct group, the sclerorhynchids, again, a rostrum with little teeth along the edge. So how do these teeth get from in the mouth to be stuck out on the snout? You know, it's not like having teeth on your nose very often, is it? If we look at these in detail, again, some beautiful CT scans here, courtesy of the Natural History Museum. You can see that with the saw shark at the top, these little teeth come attached to the outside of the rostrum of this sort of hardened snout. And in the sawfish, this modified ray, you can see they're embedded in slots. Particularly in this one, you can see a cross-section through the rostrum with these in deep slots. In both cases, these appear much more like denticles in the way they grow and in their position than they are teeth. If we then have a look at this extinct group, the sclerorhynchids, a couple of examples here. Here's a small one with very small teeth. You can see some that stick out and some that are lying flat along the side of the rostrum. Here's a much bigger one. This is Onchoprisis, a sort of a giant freshwater one. Again, you can see these big, in this case, barbed, teeth-like structures coming out. And there are some much bigger examples of this too. There are some other forms that are even more unusual. This is the rostrum of a thing called chimaeras, and when we look at it in detail, the teeth here are like stacked little triangular blades with these weird split roots that stack inside each other. Again, unlike any teeth, not really like denticles either for that matter. But when we look at this, there's a piece of one, we look at it under a CT scan. Here you can see that although we're just seeing the topmost and outermost of these sort of teeth, underneath them are lots of replacement ones coming up, replacing them from below. So we've got little ones developing, lying flat, and they rotate round, push out and push outwards. And again, in this one sliced, you can see different generations of these inside each other. A completely unique structure as far as we're aware. Certainly nothing like anything we see in teeth. Not really that much like anything we see in other denticles for that matter. But it shows that we have these, that in some occasions, we're getting tooth-like structures actually formed from denticles, but doing tooth-like function. We know, for example, that the rostra of sawfish are sometimes used to slam into prey animals and kill them, or injure them so they can then be hoovered up. The same area that produces those chimaeras rostra in Morocco, we also have lots of teeth of sharks, as we showed earlier, and particularly teeth of an early species of Otodus. Here's a couple of blocks where one's died and the teeth have just sort of fallen out into the rock, and that's being collected commercially and sold off in huge quantities. And you can see there's a few vertebrae here as well. This is a big animal. This early Otodus, this 50 million year old Otodus, probably 6, 7, possibly even 8 meters in length, the size of a great white. But that's just the start of the lineage. And forward that to about 5, 6 million years ago, it has got bigger, much bigger. So we go from these early Otodus right back to this form, Otodus megalodon. And this is where we came in. This is what are big tonguestones from Malta. These are these giant triangular teeth of what's clearly a mega predator. And here it is as often reconstructed, hunting the very small early baleen whales of the time. And of course, this Otodus megalodon, sometimes rather irritatingly for me, shortened to Meg, has often been thought of, well, it's like a giant great white. But if we compare the teeth of the two, again, thanks to David for this image, they're not only much bigger than the teeth of a modern great white, but there are some fundamental differences to them. And in fact, the ancestry of these two groups probably split something like 60 million years ago, if not much earlier. So the teeth are superficially similar, but this megalodon is not a scaled up great white. So what is it? Well, we don't have a lot to go on. We have thousands of teeth, many of them the size of your hand. We have a few saucer-sized vertebrae, or even dinner plate-sized vertebrae. And there are some fragments of jaw cartilage, there's some scales, but that's it. So for such a large and iconic creature, it clearly draws a lot of popular attention. There's a couple of recent ones. I love a poor quality shark movie, by the way. If someone wants to see a really entertaining poor quality shark movie, I'd very much recommend Under Paris on Netflix. Anyway, so this is an icon. So, but doesn't tell us what it is. We're quite lucky in that very recently a large string of vertebrae was discovered and described. And this gave a very large size. But looking at the data, it was pretty clear they got something rather wrong. For example, well, the main part, they hadn't actually realised that quite a few of the vertebrae were missing. So, although there's a very large reconstruction, it was actually still too small. And they'd also considered some of the vertebrae were included into the tail, but actually of related earlier Otodus, where we have more vertebrae, we know the tail vertebrae is slightly different shape. So we actually had to point out that, yes, you've got a huge animal here, but it's too small. So I started a project essentially looking at the scale of these. So the vertebrae seem to belong to a fairly small individual, probably a juvenile. And this would probably give a vertebral length of about 11 meters. Obviously, that doesn't give you the length of the head, and it doesn't give you the length of the tail, and it doesn't give you the body mass, body shape, and so on. So even a juvenile is well over 11 meters, maybe 15. So we then started trying to think of, well, how do we scale this? And the original paper had essentially taken a pork-beagle shark and just scaled it up. But we know they're not closely related. And actually, if you look at the growth of pork-beagle sharks, as they get bigger, they get proportionally much fatter and rounder. The same is the case of great whites. It's only unrelated sharks, like in this case the lemon shark, that retain the same general shape as they get larger. So it's clear that we have these various different body shapes that we can start scaling to as we get this thing bigger. We can also look at the shape of whales. And as the body length increases, the hydrodynamics of the body clearly change. Yeah, the drag and basically the way it can move through water, which can all be summarised as what we call fitness ratio, changes. And what we find within whales is that right up at the top here, slim, high fitness ratio, Gary Walker, a fast hunter. Right at the bottom here, in hydrodynamically rubbish position, we have the humpback whale and the right whale. These are slow swimmers. The humpback whale basically just consumes whole shoals of prey. The right whales scoop plankton up off the sea floor. So these aren't built for speed. These are built for performance. All the other whales sit somewhere between the two. With the really big ones here, there's a blue whale there. So clearly, if we want a high fitness ratio, which you'd need if you're an active predator, we need to have a relatively slim body. And if we extrapolate the growth curves of those three sharks, our poor beagle plunges down into almost immobile once you start scaling it up. Great white doesn't do much better, unless you want a great white the shape of a right whale. But the lemon shark keeps going on a shape fairly similar to that of, say, an orca. The larger sharks today, by the way, which are larger plankton feeders, so we've got the whale shark, basking shark, megamouth, also plot right in the middle of where the whales are. So from that, as we need high fitness active predator, it seems most likely that our Atotus megalodon is essentially a lemon shark shape. And if we look at the denticles of it, they're adapted for being highly streamlined. So again, for fast, efficient swimming, which again suggests they need to be up the top of that fitness ratio. So if we then take the data that we have from that partial vertebral column, we scale that up to the biggest teeth and biggest vertebrae that are known, and use this lemon shark body shape, we get something not unlike this. We end up with a very long, very slender animal, possibly 20, 25 meters in length, and even at this slender shape, we may well be hitting 90 tons. Now put that down to a large great white today of 7 meters and 2 tons. We're dealing with something here that's as large as the biggest sperm whales. And internet being what the internet is, almost immediately, in fact before this is even properly published, I found a beautiful drawing that a paleo artist has done and published online using this model to come up with what I think is probably the most realistic reconstruction we have yet. Okay, there's a lot of unknowns, the shape of the fins and so on, but this is sort of hydrodynamically stable. We also know how old these get. If you slice some of the vertebrae, they've actually got the growth lines on them. So a vertebra there, we go up to 47 years, which, if we then extrapolate out to the biggest vertebrae on this known growth size, we get to a 24-meter megalodon, getting to something like 80, 85 years old. Now that may seem very old, but that's incredibly fast growth rate. This creature here, Greenland shark, 6 meters long, gets to between 250 and 500 years old. In fact, its gestation period may be as much as 18 years. So again, this pushes that Megalodon, highly active, mega predator, very fast growing. And really something we have no ecological analogue of today. Okay, so I think I'll leave it there. I've given you a wander through a range of different shark-related topics. I apologise if I didn't go into any of them in the depth you'd have liked, but I think a bit of breadth is probably nice here. So if anyone has any questions, queries, comments, criticisms, please do.
Many thanks, Charlie. It's fascinating and slightly scary, but yes, better to swim now than to be swimming back then.
Oh yes, you know, a while ago, there was a little bit of fan fiction. It never really took on about what would happen if Tonguestones megalodon hadn't become extinct. And essentially, it went to the point where early humans wouldn't have been able to cross seas until ironclad ships had been invented. And so there's an entire alternative history that springs up around that.
Thank you. Questions, please.
Yeah,
sorry. I'd just like to make an amusing comment when you said a shark could live 250 years.
Yeah.
And then when you think in each quadrant of the jaw, there are 14 sets of teeth.
Yeah.
And those teeth have 7 replacement teeth, roughly.
Yeah.
That's a phenomenal number of teeth.
It is.
Shed by sharks that live that long.
Yeah.
Because they could hardly live that long if they didn't have their teeth.
Absolutely. Greenland sharks are weird in many respects. They may not replace their teeth as rapidly, but they still certainly replace them.
Yeah.
They spend much of their time in the Arctic. They hang around just below the surface or in shallow water. They've apparently been recorded attacking reindeer migrating across estuaries. But most of the time, off Britain we get them, but they're in water 1,000, 1,200 metres deep. And they basically, as far as we know, they wait on the seafloor till a dead whale drops down nearby. They gorge themselves, and then they sit around on the seafloor for another few years till another dead whale drops by. So they're not the most dynamic of creatures. The other term for them is sleeper shark, because apparently even one of a ton, if you can catch one on a hand line in a hole through the ice, and one person could pull it up, as long as you do it slowly.
Thanks. We have a question online from Nicholas. Is there evidence for fossil shark teeth with certain amounts of magnesium? And as an addition to this, would this manipulate the resistance against abrasion through sediment transport?
That's a good question. In fact, one that we're looking into at the moment is really whether this enhanced magnesium content or this enhanced amount of magnesium whitlockite is widespread. It's not been recorded. There is some within the dentine that forms the middle part of teeth and the enameloid that forms the outer part. But there's very, very little published data on it. So actually, a study that's going on in the Natural History Museum at the moment is to essentially try and track the occurrence of this both through fossil record and through different shark types. One interesting thing with those those whitlockite hardened bits of chimeroid teeth is they actually don't preserve very well in the fossil record. It's obviously quite soluble once it's buried down to hundreds of meters and not water flowing through it. So a lot of the times when you find fossil chimera tooth plates, they've actually got little holes in them where that hard material has actually preferentially dissolved. So it's almost counterintuitive. The hardest material is the stuff that doesn't fossilize.
Okay, thanks. And another question from Anne-Catherine. How does the study of ancient shark ecology inform modern conservation or advocacy for protection?
Potentially yes, but not as much as it should, and not as much as we'd like it to in the future. Certainly, we're now starting to get a better idea of how shark ecosystems work, particularly now that we're starting to do much more work looking at the whole ecosystem from the very smallest to the very largest and see how they fit together. And there clearly are dramatic changes that have occurred just within the last few decades. And I think potentially going forwards, there's a huge amount of work to be done using the fossil record, particularly where we're going in and out of extinction events and climate events to inform what's happened. For example, there was about 10 million years after the end Cretaceous extinction, there was a major climate event called the Pliocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or essentially we have a runaway greenhouse event, which caused an extinction of huge numbers of animals. Most mammals disappeared, among many other things. But the sharks not only seemed to cruise through it, but some of them got much bigger at that point. A Tonguestones suddenly jumped in size at that point. So clearly we have these complex relationships with climate, which we don't quite yet understand.
I mean, presumably there must be other species beyond a Tonguestones that were large.
Oh, absolutely. If we go back to when it was living, there were a number of other giant sharks. There's a thing called Tonguestones, not nowhere near as common, rather strange, so almost conical teeth. We don't know much about it, but it was clearly much bigger than any of the mega predator sharks today. There's a gigantic thresher shark, 2-3 times the size of the modern threshers that get to 5 meters. Now, whether the long whip-like tail of a thresher would work at that size is another story altogether. We probably have to shorten that off. But yes, until the start of the ice ages started to kick in about 4 million years ago, there were a lot of larger sharks than there are now.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Charlie. That was a great talk. It's sort of following on from your statement about sharks and extinctions and climate change. It's always interested me that at the KPG, people say, "Oh, the sharks sort of cruise through that event." When we think that the sort of this asteroid impact caused this kind of trophic collapse.
Yeah.
And actually, many other groups of large vertebrates and many fish groups probably went extinct at the KPG. Did the sharks really sort of cruise through, and if so, why?
It depends what you look at. If you look at the big, shallow water forms, those sclerorhynchid sawfish-like forms, incredibly abundant in the latest Cretaceous, wiped out. The commonest of the big midwater predators, the so-called anacaracid sharks with their blade-like teeth, all completely extinct. A number of other groups too. But if you were to wander down into the deeps, where it's dominated by little cat sharks, little dogfish, lantern sharks, they seem to have wandered through it as if nothing had happened. So essentially their supply of dead mosasaurs dropping from above has sort of stopped one day. They had to probably make do with eating jellyfish for a few 100,000 years, and then they're back to as they were before. And there's some work being done on deep water sediments over that extinction event in Denmark that show that really not much happens until you get several million years after the extinction, when newly evolved things come in and then displace these things that have sort of hung around in the depths without any competition.
Can I ask a follow-up? Do we know enough about the Permian shark ecology, or can we guess enough to know why at that event they were absolutely clogged?
That's a good question. That's something that, again, there's work going on with. Clearly a lot collapsed, and particularly the chimera group collapsed astronomically. Other shark groups got through and then just sort of crept along for a little bit. The world-tooth sharks, or at least one or two types of them, survived into the Triassic and then dwindled a couple of million years after the extinction event. These freshwater xenocanth sharks, these sort of eel-like forms with trident-like teeth, hung on for about another 8-10 million years before they finally succumbed. So a few things were wiped out then, a few just hung on and then dwindled away. So we're not quite sure why. why the selectivity at the moment.
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, then I think we thank Professor Underwood once more.